The security guard didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Dr. Blackwell," he said quietly, "we'll need you to wait over there for now." That there was a row of guest chairs behind the rope. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. Just a polite brush-off in a building she had financed from blueprint to chandelier. Dr. Serena Blackwell, a woman whose name appeared on every legal document tied to the mall's $500 million expansion, stood still. Her tailored suit was pristine. Her invitation bore gold foil. But none of that mattered when her skin told them a different story. And as a wealthy white family swept past, her champagne offered no questions asked. Serena quietly took her seat spine straight, pride intact and resolve sharpening. They had no idea who they'd just humiliated. But they would. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Long before the velvet ropes, the gold leaf invitations, and the marble floors, Dr. Serena Blackwell was just a quiet girl from Montgomery, Alabama, who knew how to listen better than she spoke. Raised by her grandmother Eloise, a retired schoolteacher with hands worn from years of chalk and grit, Serena learned early on that dignity wasn't something you wore. It was something you carried. She was the first in her family to attend college, then the first to earn a doctorate in urban economic development. But Serena never bragged about degrees. What she cared about was legacy, about building spaces where people of all backgrounds could walk in and feel like they belonged. That belief led her to found Blackwell Urban Partners, a development firm focused on revitalizing underserved communities. Within 15 years, her firm had reimagined transit hubs, affordable housing, and mid-tier retail into hubs of culture and commerce. She was known for two things: her meticulous attention to contracts and her refusal to cut corners ethically or structurally. So when the board of Aurora Galleria sought funding for their $500 million luxury mall expansion, they came to her. Not the other way around. She didn't just invest. She redesigned the layout, brought in diverse brands, advocated for local vendors, and negotiated a profit-sharing clause for minority-owned shops. The chairman called her the mind and moral compass of the expansion. And that made what happened on opening day even more bitter. As Serena waited in the glass atrium that morning, a man in a silver suit approached her. "Excuse me," he said, glancing at the bottle of water in her hand. "Can you check if the media room has extra badges for our photo team?" Serena blinked. "I'm sorry," she said calmly. The man tilted his head, confused. "You're with vendor services, right?" She stared at him for a long beat, then simply replied, "No." "But I built this building you're standing in." The man muttered an apology, turned red, and walked off. Serena didn't flinch, but inside, something cracked, not in weakness, but in clarity. This wasn't just a moment. This was a message. She texted no one. She didn't call a lawyer. She just sat down, crossed her legs, and started mentally reviewing every contractual clause she'd helped write. Especially the ones tied to project oversight and funding suspension. Back in 2018, she'd insisted on an accountability clause that would allow a stakeholder with controlling interest to freeze operations if they detected a breach of leadership integrity. The board had agreed naively; they thought it was a formality. Now she remembered every word of it. Across the room, the White family that had been ushered past her were being photographed under a gold banner that read, "Aurora welcomes tomorrow's leaders." Serena allowed herself a faint smile. That banner wasn't even in the original plans. She'd cut that line item in her draft budget, but someone had added it back in. With a slight tilt of her wrist, Serena checked the time. 9:42 a.m. Her appointment with the board was scheduled for 10 Andra. She knew now she wouldn't attend. Instead, she would make one quiet move, and every inch of this glass palace would feel it. By 9:50, she had composed the message. Not on her phone, but in her mind, word for word, like a lawyer writing a verdict. There would be no rage, no confrontation, just consequences. Because this wasn't just about being made to wait. It was about what people thought they could get away with, even when standing inside a palace someone else paid for. The air inside Aurora Galleria's atrium was crisp, engineered to perfection by architects who believed cool air meant high-end experience. But for Serena Blackwell, seated beneath a chandelier she'd personally signed off on, the chill felt deeply familiar. It wasn't the temperature. It was the treatment. She sat with poise, shoulders back, jaw relaxed, a bottle of still water in her hand. Every inch of her outward posture screamed control. But inside, her thoughts were moving quickly, systematically, like a checklist clicking into place. Around her, the performance continued. Hosts in black blazers greeted newcomers with warm smiles. Guests with thin resumes but thick portfolios were fast-tracked through security with no questions asked. Serena watched as 3 young men in sneakers and branded hoodies bypassed her an assistant, whispering to a hostess, they're from VentureStream Capital. Instant green light. Then came the glances. Not stares. No one was that obvious. But she could feel the flickers of doubt in the eyes of interns, the deliberate disinterest of receptionists, and the way even junior executives pretended not to recognize her. At 9:56 a.m., Serena's gaze met that of a young Asian intern, Emma Nguyen, stationed near the hospitality desk. Emma looked new, uncertain, still holding her tablet too tightly with both hands. Her eyes flicked to Serena, then to the tablet, then back again. She hesitated, took a half step forward. Her lips moved. I think she's but Michelle Hayes, the head hostess, turned sharply. She's already been assisted, Michelle said, voice cool but firm. Back to your station, Emma. Emma flinched, a pause, then nodded eyes dropping to the marble floor. She turned and began organizing a stack of promotional brochures she hadn't even unfolded. Serena exhaled slowly. That moment told her everything. The hierarchy here was no accident. It was learned, reinforced, and executed in silence. She glanced again at her phone, not to check messages, but to look at the icon of her private executive control app. It sat quietly on the home screen waiting. The system had been developed after a near lawsuit in a prior project where Serena had been locked out of crucial approval decisions. She'd vowed never again to lose visibility or authority in her own investments. And now that tool might become her greatest weapon. She tapped it once just to see the dashboard load. All green lights, all funds active. That would change soon. From the far side of the atrium, she heard laughter. A man in designer loafers cracked a joke with 2 others pointing toward the velvet rope. Heard that section's for guests of honor only. He chuckled. The implication hung in the air. Serena was sitting behind that rope. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. She simply tapped the app shut again, then closed her eyes. Years ago, during her first board meeting as CEO of Blackwell Urban Partners, a partner had warned her, in this world, silence is often interpreted as weakness. She'd corrected him gently. No, she said. Silence is currency. You spend it when the return is greatest. And now, in the very heart of the building, she helped design. Surrounded by people who didn't even bother to look at her name badge, she was accumulating interest. Time passed in deliberate slowness. The announcement came over the speaker. VIP guests for the executive walkthrough. Please proceed to the gold elevators. Serena heard her name mentioned nowhere. She watched as another white couple strangers to her not investors were escorted toward the lifts. Lucas, the head of private security, even opened the rope for them. No hesitation. Serena finally stood. She walked over to the nearby water station again, not for thirst, but because movement gave her rhythm. She poured another bottle. The act so small, it might have looked mindless, but her mind was on fire. She had made her decision. By 10:03 a.m., her scheduled boardroom appointment was officially overdue. No assistant came. No alert chimed. Nothing. Serena walked calmly back to her seat, sat down, folded her hands. Across the atrium, Michelle Hayes was already greeting a sports team owner. Cameras flashed. Serena's presence remained deliberately unseen, but within the hour, her absence would shake every floor of Aurora Galleria. The chair beneath Serena Blackwell felt firmer now, not because the cushion had changed, but because she had. Her waiting was no longer passive. It was strategic. Across the atrium, Michelle Hayes stood beneath a gold-trimmed banner, her posture straight, her clipboard clutched like a scepter. Lucas Grant leaned against the elevator pillar nearby, arms crossed, gaze scanning the crowd. Neither had looked her way in nearly an hour, but they would soon. Serena picked up her phone again, not hurriedly, not angrily, just with the same confidence she carried into every boardroom she'd ever led. The app opened instantly. Her face unlocked it. Her fingerprint confirmed access. Blackwell Executive Oversight System secure. A few swipes revealed everything. Vendor schedule active. Lease proposal signings pending. Site phase approvals green. Public relations itinerary unlocked. She tapped override protocol. A warning message blinked on screen. You're about to suspend all active Central Mall expansion operations. Are you sure? Her finger hovered. Serena took a sip of water, then pressed confirm. There was no sound, no explosion, no music cue. But everything changed. At first, nothing happened. Then, 20 feet away, a young man with a company-issued tablet stopped mid-stride. He tapped the screen again, frowning. Then another screen on the wall flickered. Digital Directory Status Update. Central Mall Expansion Executive Review. All negotiations suspended. Michelle Hayes turned toward it, instinctively blinking. She tapped her earpiece. Julia, she said. Voice slightly raised, check on the project approval schedule. On the other end, Julia's voice came faint and shaky. It just locked up. Everything's frozen. Even the press briefing folder. I don't hold on, security is calling. Lucas shifted his stance. His radio buzzed. Control to Lucas. We're seeing suspension flags across executive dashboards. Did you receive a directive? No, Lucas replied slowly. Not a word. He turned his head slightly, and for the first time all morning his eyes met Serena's. She gave no expression, just a calm blink. Lucas looked away, but his jaw clenched. In Serena's app, everything turned gray. One status bar after another paused, deferred, locked, awaiting review. The clause she had fought for in the contract, the one executives had called excessive, had just become her silent sword. She remembered the legal debate during contract negotiations. But Dr. Blackwell, this level of control is unusual, they had warned. And this level of funding is uncommon, she had replied with a smile. I don't invest without accountability. Now that clause stood like a legal drawbridge. She had pulled it up. No one could cross without her say. Back in the atrium, murmurs grew. A prominent real estate executive looked up from his smartwatch and muttered, "Something's going on." Michelle was now typing rapidly. Lucas had left his post. A senior operations manager sprinted across the floor, whispering into a phone. The energy shifted. Eyes darted. The seamless flow of elite hospitality had cracked. But still, no one approached Serena. Not a soul asked her what she knew. No apology. No invitation. No recognition. And that was the most powerful detail of all. She didn't need to be seen to be in control. She already was. Emma Nguyen, the intern, stood frozen behind the front desk. Her eyes were fixed on the screen that now read, "Due to executive review, all event timelines are temporarily on hold." She looked towards Serena. Their eyes met. Emma blinked once, then looked down again. But Serena had seen enough. There was understanding in that glance. In this ecosystem built on hierarchy, Serena had just turned off gravity. By 10:20 a.m., Serena stood slowly and walked once again to the refreshment station. She didn't need water, but she wanted a moment to reflect. Behind her screens now pulsed with updates. Vendor briefings delayed. Investor presentation canceled. Guest tour schedules suspended. And still, Serena remained untouched by the whirlwind she had created. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, and everyone adjusts. She returned to her seat, folded her hands once again, and waited. For what? For them to come to her. For someone to ask what just happened. For every person who looked past her to realize she hadn't disappeared. She had risen. In high-end hospitality, nothing unsettles staff more than a shift in rhythm when things that normally flow without thought begin to falter. That's exactly what was happening inside the gleaming atrium of Aurora Galleria. From the outside, everything still looked polished. Champagne was being poured, photo ops staged, and VIPs smiled at camera flashes. But inside, those who worked the floor began to sense something was off. Schedules stopped syncing. Badges weren't scanning. One elevator malfunctioned. Another couldn't find a destination code. And the only person not moving was the black woman still seated near the marble column, Dr. Serena Blackwell. Across the atrium, Emma Nguyen hovered behind the hostess stand, her body stiff with caution. Just an hour ago, she had been scolded publicly for questioning protocol. Now she was seeing the same protocol unravel in real time. She looked toward Serena again. Still calm. Still quiet. It didn't make sense. But Emma knew this wasn't coincidence. Michelle Hayes was unraveling. From the outside, she still wore the smile. She still gave that practiced nod and used her velvet voice to direct guests. But to the trained eye, or to anyone watching closely, her veneer was cracking. She had called upper management 3 times in 10 minutes. No one answered. She had pinged Lucas twice. He had stopped replying. And now her tablet showed the same system-wide error again. Central Mall expansion paused by executive command. What executive? She hissed under her breath. One of her assistants approached with wide eyes. Michelle. The media team just got an email saying, today's walkthrough is canceled. Michelle snapped her head up. Canceled? Who canceled it? The assistant stammered. It just... said from Central Oversight. Signed BUP. Blackwell Urban Partners. Michelle's hand trembled slightly as she scrolled back through her tablet logs. Across the atrium, Serena sat still. Michelle darted over to Lucas, who stood near the private elevator bank, now speaking quietly with mall security. We need to take back control of this, she whispered harshly. Lucas didn't respond. I don't care if it's a software glitch or some intern pushing the wrong protocol. We have VIPs arriving in waves, she continued. Get tech support. Reboot everything if you have to. We cannot let this... Lucas cut her off, voice low but sharp. It's not a glitch. Michelle blinked. What do you mean? Lucas leaned in slightly, glancing toward Serena. That's Dr. Serena Blackwell. She's the primary investor. She owns controlling stake in the expansion. If she pushed that button, there's no override. Michelle froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. She's been sitting there this whole time, Lucas said. Watching. Waiting. While we walked past her like she was invisible. Michelle turned slowly, eyes, finding Serena still calm, still poised, still dangerous. For the first time, Michelle felt small. Emma saw the exchange from behind the front desk. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She watched Michelle's shoulders drop. She saw Lucas's hand move to his earpiece, then fall away in resignation. And she saw Serena not move at all, because she didn't need to. Emma turned to her tablet again, swiping through the internal schedule she had memorized. Nothing made sense anymore. Meetings postponed. Investor Q&As grayed out. PR interviews canceled. Her training manual had never accounted for this. What Emma did understand, however, was the weight of silence and the precision of someone who could turn an empire sideways with a single tap. Back on the floor, Serena shifted ever so slightly in her seat. She noticed a ripple fewer staff laughing, fewer greetings being exchanged. Voices lowered. Movement slowed. Even the lights programmed to adapt to occupancy had dimmed slightly. This was the pre-collapse hush, the moment just before people admit to themselves that the system is breaking down. And Serena. She let it happen. She wasn't interested in punishing individuals. She was interested in exposing the pattern and forcing accountability. Emma took a quiet breath and did something she hadn't been trained to do. She left her post. She walked slowly, respectfully across the floor, stopped a few feet away from Serena, didn't interrupt, didn't kneel, just stood still like a quiet signal. Serena turned slightly and gave her a nod. That nod said, "You see it now, don't you?" And Emma did. Back behind the velvet rope, Michelle was beginning to panic in private. One hand clutched her tablet, the other rifled through event binders. No matter where she looked, Serena Blackwell's name appeared again and again, signatures, approval stamps, stakeholder directives. She hadn't just been a guest. She had been the architect. And they had treated her like a trespasser. The mall hadn't collapsed. The lights were still on. The guests still sipped champagne. But beneath the marble and chandeliers, power had shifted not with a bang, but with a glance. And everyone who mattered was just starting to notice. In the upper levels of Aurora Galleria, the tension was no longer a quiet current. It had become a visible fracture. In the boardroom hallway, the chairman's executive assistant, Gregory Schultz, held a phone to one ear and typed with the other. His usually composed demeanor had begun to fray. "No, I don't know why the expansion protocol was paused," he said tightly. "No, the chairman hasn't issued a freeze. This directive came from Blackwell Urban Partners." "Yes, that Blackwell." A long pause. Then, "Yes, I suggest you pull the investor summary before the press sees this." In the atrium below, Serena remained seated. She wasn't scrolling her phone. She wasn't even drinking her water anymore. She simply sat still upright, resolute like a fixture carved from stone and steel. All around her, people moved, but none approached. Across the room, Lucas was whispering to a security lieutenant. Michelle had disappeared behind the velvet curtain leading to the concierge lounge, but even from a distance, her voice could be heard tight and rising. Emma Nguyen stood behind the reception podium now, not speaking, just watching. Watching Serena. Watching what power in its quietest form looked like. Then it happened. A sleek figure in a navy blue suit approached Serena. Gregory Schultz. He stopped a few feet away, clearing his throat with practiced diplomacy. "Dr. Blackwell," he began. "Chairman Prescott requests your presence in the executive boardroom on level 3. Serena didn't turn her head. "Now, if possible," Gregory added, lowering his tone. The seconds that followed were still. Serena finally looked up, not at Gregory, but past him toward the staircase that led to the boardroom suite. Her gaze was calm, unwavering. Then she turned back and said simply, "No." Gregory blinked. I'm sorry, Dr. Blackwell." "Perhaps you didn't hear," I heard Serena said softly. "But I'm not moving. Not yet." A pause. Not confrontational. Not defiant. Just final. "Tell the chairman," she said, folding her hands again, "when the room is ready for accountability, not just explanations. I'll join him." Gregory didn't know what to do with that. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then, realizing there was no backup plan for this, he simply nodded and walked away, his pace slower, his posture uncertain. Emma saw it all from her desk. Her breath caught. This woman, this quiet, composed woman, had just told the most powerful man in the building. Not until I decide. Upstairs, the boardroom remained brightly lit, but functionally useless. The screen at the front still displayed project metrics. But now the centerpiece was a blinking red banner. Executive hold, initiated awaiting stakeholder directive. Executives murmured around the table. Some checked their phones. One tried emailing Serena directly. The message bounced. Chairman Alexander Prescott sat at the head of the table, brow furrowed. "She's not coming?" he asked Gregory, who had returned, visibly rattled. "Not at the moment," Sir Gregory said. She said, "When the room is ready for accountability." Prescott leaned back silent. In that moment, he knew Serena wasn't staging a tantrum. She was enacting a protocol they had all signed. Meanwhile, down in the atrium, a shift had begun. The digital display that once showed luxury retail reimagined now cycled to Central Mall expansion, paused by primary investor executive review in progress, guests noticed. A woman in pearls turned to her husband. Did they say? Paused. A tech founder in a blazer glanced toward his assistant. Why would she freeze it? This place is ready to launch. Whispers multiplied like sparks in dry grass. And Serena still seated, still unmoved. She wasn't leading with fire. She was leading with absence, and in doing so, she was becoming unavoidable. At 10:42 a.m., a group of junior operations staff gathered at the side hallway. Their group leader, a young man in his 30s, muttered, "That's Dr. Blackwell, right?" The investor Emma, now standing nearby, finally spoke. "Yes," she said softly, "that's her." He looked at her. "Why didn't anyone greet her?" Emma hesitated, then replied, "Because they didn't think they had to." The weight of that sentence sank in. Serena finally stood, not to leave, but to stretch like someone unbothered by the clock. She walked once again to the water station, poured one glass, looked at her reflection in the mirror behind the dispenser. The woman staring back was unbent, unbothered, unrelenting. She sipped once, returned to her seat, and waited. Because power, real power, doesn't move on demand. It makes everyone else do the moving. In the architecture of any institution, there are unwritten rules: who speaks first, who waits, who walks, and who sits. At Aurora Galleria, one of the oldest unspoken laws was simple Chairman Alexander Prescott never descended to the lobby. If you wanted a meeting, you went to him. Always. But that morning, as emails stacked, phones rang unanswered, and every stakeholder report showed paused by executive authority. Prescott closed his laptop, stood from the leather chair at the head of the boardroom table, and walked toward the elevator. He didn't ask for a coat, didn't notify his assistant. He pressed the button himself. Down in the atrium, Serena remained seated, water in hand, her phone untouched. When the elevator pinged and opened, several guests turned in surprise. The chairman of Aurora Holdings descending into the public floor, unheard of. And yet, here he was, walking toward one person only. Across the room, Emma Nguyen straightened instinctively. She had only seen Prescott on internal videos, stiff calculated, always surrounded by staff. Today, he walked alone. No velvet rope, no entourage. Just a gray suit and a humbled gait. Michelle Hayes peeked out from the lounge area, her face pale. She ducked back inside. Lucas, still flanking the reception side, watched silently. He knew this moment mattered. Prescott reached Serena's chair. She looked up, but didn't rise. "Dr. Blackwell," he said, nodding. "May I sit?" She gestured toward the leather seat beside her. "Of course," she replied. "That chair's been empty all morning." He sat slowly. For a long moment, nothing was said. Serena sipped her water. Prescott folded his hands, resting them on his knees. Then he spoke not with authority, but with reflection. "This project. It wasn't supposed to feel like this," he said quietly. "We promised something different. We thought we were doing better." Serena looked ahead, not at him. "Intentions aren't accountability." "I know," he said. "You let your people create a palace of exclusion," she said gently, and when someone asked, "Why is she waiting?" they were told, "She's been assisted." Prescott nodded. The words stung, but he didn't deflect. I owe you an apology, he said, not just as chairman. As a man who saw your signature on every blueprint and still let others treat you like a footnote. Serena turned to him now fully. Alexander, she said evenly, you didn't let them. You empowered them. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was cleansing. Prescott sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. What would you have me do? She didn't hesitate. Start by acknowledging that this is the room that matters, she said, not the one upstairs. The decisions don't live in documents. They live in behaviors. And you just watched yours fail in real time. He nodded slowly. You're right. Emma watched from across the floor. A chairman sitting beside a black woman executive speaking in measured tones, surrounded by confused guests and frozen schedules. This wasn't just a reversal. This was a reckoning. Serena stood slowly. I'll come upstairs, she said, but not to be placated. I'm coming to lead. Prescott rose beside her. I wouldn't ask for anything less. They began walking side by side. No security, no protocol, just two people in conversation. And in that moment, for the first time that day, every head in the atrium turned. They weren't looking at the banners anymore. They were looking at the woman who had refused to stand until the building itself bent toward her. As they reached the elevator, Serena paused and looked back. Emma stood there, frozen. Serena gave her a nod. Emma's eyes widened. She didn't smile. She just took a deep breath, shoulders squaring. That nod would change her life. The elevator doors closed. And for the first time all morning, the digital display above the reception desk changed. Meeting in progress leadership review underway. The elevator opened with a soft chime. Dr. Serena Blackwell stepped out beside Chairman Prescott, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor of the executive suite. The hallway was hushed tension woven into every breath of the staff standing nearby. A few pretended to check their tablets. Others simply turned away. The doors to the boardroom opened automatically. Inside, senior executives sat upright, murmurs dying into silence as Serena entered. No one stood to greet her, and yet she was the only one commanding the room. Prescott gestured to the head seat, the one that until this moment had always belonged to him. She took it, calmly, without fanfare. I won't be long, Serena said, setting her water bottle on the table. But we are going to be clear. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look for drama. She simply unfolded a printed page she had prepared years ago, Section 9 of the Executive Accountability Clause, the very clause they had all signed. She read it aloud. In the event that stakeholder treatment or internal behavior at any public-facing company function reflects institutional bias, discriminatory conduct, or disproportionate exclusionary protocol, any majority investor may at their sole discretion freeze operations for executive review. She folded the page. Today, she said, I exercised that right. Not one person at the table dared interrupt. Serena looked directly at the head of operations. Mr. Gaines, how many VIPs were registered today? He swallowed. 74. And how many of them were personally greeted at arrival? He looked down. About 50. And how many of those 50 were verified by name credentials or appointment a pause? Most were just recognized. She nodded. Recognized. Serena continued, her tone still measured. A black woman with full clearance and contractual oversight was asked to wait while investors with no ownership stake were waved through. She looked at the PR director. A public reception displayed no images of diverse contributors. The digital banner featured faces that did not include any of our minority executives. She looked at the legal advisor. A junior intern tried to raise a concern and was shut down in public by a manager who didn't know who I was, but somehow knew I didn't belong. She paused. This is not about me, she said. It's about what you've built. Prescott cleared his throat. Dr. Blackwell. I want to reiterate on behalf of the board how sincerely we regret. She held up a hand. I'm not interested in regrets. Her gaze scanned the room. I want reforms. The room stiffened. What kind of reforms? Asked the VP of Development. Serena leaned forward. Training. That's surface level. Diversity workshops. You've done those already. She pointed to the center of the table, where a digital panel displayed team rosters and site protocols. I'm talking about re-engineering how leadership thinks about access, not just appearance. From badge policy to hospitality procedure, from intern onboarding to executive welcome culture, the legal counsel finally spoke. With all due respect, Dr. Blackwell, these are big shifts. They'll take time. Serena met his eyes. No, they'll take priority. Silence. Then a quiet ping from the screen behind her. It was an internal message from one of the investor teams following recent developments. We request an urgent update on leadership direction. Stakeholders are watching closely. Serena tapped the screen to dismiss it. See, the world is watching. We don't get to stall anymore. She rose. I will unfreeze this project in 24 hours, only if the board delivers a written commitment to 1. Personnel review of public-facing managers. 2. Independent audit of hospitality behavior. 3. Redesign of VIP protocol with equity at the core. 4. Inclusion of junior voices, especially the ones who dare to ask questions. Her voice didn't tremble. It sharpened. If you want my capital, you'll match it with integrity. No one argued. No one protested. Because what she had just offered wasn't a request. It was a mirror. By the time Serena returned to the atrium, it wasn't the same space she had left behind. Yes, the chandeliers still glittered, and the velvet ropes still hung in soft arcs. But the air had changed. Not just cooler, but heavier, like everyone was holding their breath. Emma Nguyen stood behind the podium, no longer just another intern. Her spine was straighter, her gaze sharper. She'd watched Serena dismantle an entire system without raising her voice, and now she couldn't unsee what power really looked like. As Serena walked past, Emma nodded slightly. And for the first time since her orientation, she didn't feel invisible. Michelle Hayes re-entered the lobby through the service corridor, clipboard clutched in white-knuckled hands. Her lipstick, once impeccable, had faded. Her steps, normally confident, were too fast, too nervous. She scanned the room. Where was everyone? Why was the investor lounge empty? Why weren't more guests arriving? Why wasn't her tablet syncing anymore? She tapped the screen, nothing. Rebooted, still frozen. The same warning flashed: VIP host control disabled, executive access overwritten. Her mouth went dry. Lucas Grant stood near the central elevator bank, speaking in hushed tones into his radio. Normally, his earpiece was buzzing with event updates and security pings. Now, static. He caught Michelle's eye. She strode toward him. "What's going on?" she hissed. Lucas didn't answer right away. Then, flatly, she met with the board. They're drafting a full executive commitment protocol. Michelle blinked. Wait already. But they just sat down. She didn't ask for discussion. Lucas replied. She gave conditions. Michelle exhaled sharply. So what now? We act like nothing happened. Put the schedule back up. Lucas looked down. There's more. A low beep came from Michelle's tablet. The screen flickered back to life, but not with her usual dashboard. A single banner glowed. Internal HR flag, pending investigation. Michelle Hayes. Her hands trembled. She tapped through layers of security clearance, but access was blocked. Lucas's radio buzzed. He turned, slightly listening, then looked back at Michelle. They're pulling your clearance, he said. Effective immediately. Her jaw dropped. What, there's an audit? Serena's terms include a full review of hospitality leadership. He paused. You're first. Michelle stumbled back a step, eyes scanning the room like she could rewind the last 2 hours. She sat there, Michelle whispered. She sat there the whole time. I didn't know who she was. Lucas didn't respond, because it didn't matter anymore. At the reception desk, Emma's tablet pinged. She looked down and saw the update, upcoming restructure guest services. Temporary reporting line, assigned to Amir Nguyen. Emma stared at it for a long moment, then whispered to herself, "This is real." Serena, meanwhile, had taken a seat again. Same leather armchair, same composed posture. She didn't need to bark orders or raise her voice. The building was now rotating around her presence. Across the atrium, digital signage updated again. Project status restart. Contingent on equity compliance. Stakeholder leadership review in progress. Guests murmured. Reporters refreshed news apps. A nearby investor scrolled a LinkedIn update that read, "Black CEO stalls $500 project after silent humiliation. Power has a new name." Serena Blackwell. Michelle hovered near the exit, unsure what to do. No one asked her to stay. No one asked her to go. Eventually, she began walking towards the staff corridor. As she passed Emma, their eyes met. Emma didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She simply said softly, "You could have just welcomed her." Michelle's jaw tightened. Her heels clicked against the marble as she disappeared around the corner. And with that, the old regime took its first step out the door. The atrium was quieter now, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting for something better. And this time, Serena wasn't just the architect of the building. She was the architect of its future. For the first time since the atrium opened that morning, there was no frantic clicking of heels, no flurry of clipboards, no artificial smiles. There was only quiet adjustment. Staff who had once performed like polished gears in a luxury machine now moved with a kind of cautious awareness. Every gesture, every word, every glance toward the guest lounge was now measured because the person seated near the marble pillar wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was the standard. Dr. Serena Blackwell didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her presence, her restraint, her memory of every single detail that was enough to reshape behavior. Emma Nguyen stepped out from behind the front desk, not as a bystander, but as an emerging steward. Her tablet had updated again. Effective immediately interim coordination duties E. Nguyen. She blinked, then glanced toward Serena, who was quietly speaking with a facilities executive. Emma walked toward the service counter where an anxious team of junior hosts had gathered. They looked uncertain, some skeptical, others relieved. No one had been given instructions. No one had told them if Michelle was returning. Emma didn't give orders. She gave structure. "We'll begin reordering the guest list by confirmed appointment," she said. "No more visual assumptions. Full ID check for every name." One of the hosts raised a brow. "Even for the big donors?" Emma nodded. "Everyone." A pause. Then, one by one, they started to nod back. Across the floor, Lucas Grant had returned to his position by the elevators, but his posture had changed. Less dominant, more reserved. He now wore his earpiece, but no longer barked instructions. Instead, he leaned in to a younger security trainee and said quietly, "If someone asks a question, don't dismiss them. Listen, even if they look ordinary." The younger guard looked up puzzled but nodded. Lucas didn't elaborate. He just stared towards the glass ceiling. Serena stood speaking briefly with the general operations manager. "No, I don't want press coverage," she said. "If you want to fix what happened today, don't stage a redemption. Stage a transformation." He nodded, scribbling notes. She added, "Start with the welcome desk. Rethink what it says about who belongs." Back at the lounge entrance, two well-dressed investors entered quietly. One of them hesitated, glancing at Serena before whispering to his companion, "That's her, isn't it? The one who halted the whole expansion. The companion nodded. She didn't halt it. She refined it. The first man tilted his head. You think she'll restart it? The answer came from Serena herself, who turned toward them and offered a brief, professional nod. They nodded back, not with superiority, but with respect. On the far wall, digital signage cycled to a new screen. Guest experience transition in progress. Thank you for your patience. It wasn't corporate jargon. It was the truth. In the break room, junior staff huddled around an internal email. Dr. Serena Blackwell has requested an internal roundtable for reception staff next week. Open forum, anonymous submissions welcome. A hostess whispered, she doesn't want to punish. She wants to understand. Another added, feels like she's running this place now. Someone replied, she always was. By early afternoon, Serena prepared to leave. She didn't make an announcement. She simply gathered her things, nodded to a few staffers, and walked toward the East Wing doors. As she passed the reception podium, Emma straightened up. Dr. Blackwell, she said. Serena paused. Thank you, Emma said, for not walking away. Serena looked at her eyes calm. Thank you for noticing what others refused to. They shook hands gently, firmly, equally. Then Serena stepped outside into the sunlight. Behind her, the atrium seemed quieter. But it wasn't silence out of fear. It was attention. For the first time, everyone inside Aurora Galleria was paying attention. And that Serena knew was where real change always began. The sunlight outside Aurora Galleria was soft, filtered through the curved glass roof like morning gold. But inside the building, the glow was colder. It was the light of reckoning. Upstairs, within the Human Resources suite on level 4, a quiet storm was moving. HR Director Jeanette Holloway tapped the touchscreen on her desk. Eyes narrowed as she reviewed the sequence of events from the morning. She didn't wait for a directive. She'd been in this company long enough to sense when the wind had changed. The moment Dr. Serena Blackwell left the boardroom, Jeanette opened a formal case file. Subject 1, Hayes, Michelle. Subject 2, Grant, Lucas. Violation, breach of protocol, discriminatory treatment, failure to uphold stakeholder dignity. Attached were 3 internal witness statements, including one submitted anonymously from a junior team member. Attached was also footage security feed from 9:43 a.m., showing Michelle waving the Lennox family through without verification, while Serena remained seated nearby, visibly holding her invitation. Jeanette didn't need interpretation. The images spoke volumes. The first message went to Chairman Prescott. The second to legal counsel. The third to Serena. Downstairs, Emma's tablet buzzed. She looked down. A new alert blinked, restricted access. Michelle Hayes, Lucas Grant. Status under immediate review. Emma stared at it, frozen. She looked up. Lucas was still standing near the elevator bank, arms crossed, but then his earpiece crackled. He turned, listened. His face didn't change much, but he took a breath and stepped away from the rope line. He didn't say a word to anyone. Michelle, elsewhere in the admin wing, received the same message. Her reaction wasn't as contained. Serena's phone buzzed as she stepped into the back seat of her black executive sedan. She glanced down. From HR Oversight, Dr. Blackwell, your conditions are being honored. Termination proceedings have begun. Official notices served to Hayes and Grant. Next, new onboarding protocol audit and your approval of internal restructure to begin Friday. Serena didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply closed her eyes for a long, quiet breath. It was done. Not vengeance, not spectacle. Accountability. At 12:24 p.m., Michelle Hayes stepped into the HR interview room. 2 senior staff members were already waiting. This is a formal misconduct review, one said. Michelle's voice cracked. I didn't mean she didn't introduce herself. I didn't know who she was. That's not the issue, the other HR rep said gently. The issue is why you treated her the way you did even before you knew her name. Michelle looked down. For the first time that day, she had no script. Meanwhile, Lucas Grant had surrendered his access badge at the security terminal. He said nothing, just handed it over. The guard took it. No questions. No handshake. Lucas looked over his shoulder at the atrium at the guests still being ushered in now with precision and dignity. He walked out through the side door. Back at the podium, Emma Nguyen glanced around. She saw staff moving with more focus. She saw a revised guest list loading with verified confirmations and timestamps. She saw 2 new trainees being given instructions, and for the first time they were being told, every guest is a VIP until proven otherwise. Serena, seated in her car, stared out the tinted window. Her driver waited for direction. She didn't speak. But her phone buzzed again. From Emma Nguyen, I just wanted to thank you again. Everyone here is already different. It's like the air changed. Serena replied with just one line. Keep breathing it. Keep clearing it for others. Behind her, Aurora Galleria glowed beneath the midday sun. The surface gleamed. But now, so did its conscience. It started with a single tweet. A blurry photo taken from the upper level of Aurora Galleria showing Dr. Serena Blackwell seated calmly while a white family was being ushered past her champagne in hand. The caption read, "That's the CEO of the entire project, ignored," while others skipped the line. Moments later, she shut down a $500 deal with one tap. Power. Serena Blackwell. Within minutes, it had over 4,000 retweets. By the end of the hour, it had passed 100,000. Local news outlets picked up the story first. Blackwell halts Central Mall. Expansion in stunning move was this racism silent CEO's stand makes national waves. Reporters swarmed Aurora Galleria's public press line. Phones rang off the hook. By mid-afternoon, Serena's PR manager forwarded over 39 media requests, including CNN, NPR, and The Atlantic. One headline said, "It all." She funded the building. They made her wait outside it. But Serena wasn't at home scrolling Twitter. She was seated in a quiet corner of a community co-working space she had once funded on the South Side Laptop Open, reviewing onboarding proposals for the new guest services team. She didn't want credit. She wanted follow-through. Meanwhile, across the country, corporate leaders began to text each other. Did you see what happened with Blackwell? She locked down $500 yuan with a security clause genius. Can we audit our reception protocols before someone else does? The message was clear. Serena hadn't just exposed a cultural failure, she'd demonstrated how to respond to one with structure, not scandal. At Aurora Galleria, new signs were already being mounted, every voice, every name, every time. It wasn't branding. It was a reset. At 4:16 p.m., Serena's phone buzzed again. A trusted colleague had sent her a screenshot. Trending on Twitter. Serena Blackwell 3, trending in business. 500M. Freeze underneath were screenshots of op-eds, thought pieces, and comment threads. Words like elegance, justice, silent power, and corporate reckoning kept appearing. Another alert came through from a corporate diversity alliance. We'd like to invite Dr. Blackwell to deliver the keynote at our National Forum on Equity in Executive Culture. Then another. Is there any chance she would join the President's Advisory Council on Inclusive Infrastructure? Serena exhaled. What had begun as a simple demand for basic respect had now become a case study in institutional response. But not all voices were celebrating. A few critics online accused her of overreacting, of embarrassing the team, or weaponizing influence. Serena didn't flinch. She didn't need to clap back. because every response in her favor came from people who had lived it. I've been Serena in that chair, watching others be welcomed while I disappeared. My mom was turned away at a business lounge just last week. Thank you for not letting it slide. Back inside, Aurora Junior staff gathered around a lobby monitor that now displayed rotating headlines. Emma Nguyen watched quietly as a line of text scrolled across the screen. Black CEO turns moment of disrespect into blueprint for corporate accountability. One staffer whispered, "That's who I work for." Someone else replied, "No, that's who I want to become." Later that evening, Serena was scheduled to meet with a nonprofit she supported. The meeting shifted to virtual too-many press vans outside the venue. As she logged into the Zoom call, the host smiled. "Dr. Blackwell, before we begin, just want to say, we saw what you did today. You said nothing, but you spoke volumes." Serena smiled. "Thank you. Now let's get to work." She didn't bask in attention. She redirected it toward systems, toward staff, toward the standards that would outlast the moment. Because for Serena Blackwell, this was never about going viral. It was about making sure no one else would ever have to sit in that chair again, silent, unseen, waiting for permission in a building they paid to build. In movements of real change, the most powerful moment isn't always the first strike. It's what happens after, when people who once watched in silence begin to speak. That's what began unfolding at Aurora Galleria, in inboxes, group chats, and quiet hallways. The morning after Serena's executive intervention, HR received 6 anonymous submissions from current staff. One read, "I've seen guests who didn't look the part, turned away with fake explanations. It wasn't protocol, it was profiling. I didn't speak up because I thought it was just how things worked." Another said, "Emma wasn't the only intern who noticed. I did too, but I was told to mind my pay grade. Thank you for proving we weren't crazy." In a break room usually reserved for small talk and leftover pastries, junior employees sat in tight circles, whispering stories they once told only to their families. "I remember when a black veteran came in," one said, dressed in denim, had an invitation. Michelle made him wait while she offered espresso to a fashion blogger. Another nodded. "We weren't trained to do that. We were conditioned to." Across the country, former employees began commenting on LinkedIn, "I used to work at Aurora." The culture was subtle exclusion. You either adapted or got pushed out. Serena's stand long overdue, and then came the video. Uploaded quietly to a small Reddit thread titled, "Why Does This Feel Familiar?" The footage was from 6 months ago, recorded by a guest. It showed Michelle Hayes telling an elderly black woman in a wheelchair that her reservation wasn't in the system, even as the woman presented a printed confirmation. Behind her, a younger white couple was ushered through with a joke and a hug. The video had barely made waves when it first appeared. A minor incident, the moderators had said. Not enough context. Now, with context, it exploded. Within hours, the video was trending alongside Serena's name. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. How many others were told to wait, while the privileged walked past news anchors, replayed the footage with side-by-side comparisons to Serena's story. And beneath it all, the central question emerged. If this is how they treated the CEO, what did they do to the rest of us? Emma Nguyen watched it unfold from her apartment, knees pulled to her chest. She hadn't known about the earlier video. Seeing it now, she felt something twist in her gut. She remembered the flicker in Michelle's eyes when she was told to stop helping Serena. It hadn't been confusion. It had been control. And now the world could see it. At Blackwell, Urban Partners. Serena's executive assistant fielded over 300 messages in a 24-hour span. but one stood out, a handwritten letter scanned and emailed by an elderly guest. Dear Dr. Blackwell, I don't know if you remember me. I was at your community project launch last fall. I watched what you did this week. Thank you for showing my granddaughters that we don't have to shout to be heard. We just have to stand still long enough to be seen. Serena printed the letter, framed it, placed it above her desk. At Aurora's leadership floor, change accelerated. A third-party inclusion consultancy was brought in. Former staff were invited to confidential listening sessions. Serena requested Emma Nguyen be present in every leadership briefing going forward, not as decoration, but as insight. Emma didn't decline. She showed up early, took notes, and spoke when others hesitated, not because she wanted a title, but because she had seen what silence cost. That week, the company newsletter featured something unprecedented, a segment titled, Voices We Didn't Hear Until Now. It was raw, uneven, but honest. And in the center, a quote from Serena: "Respect isn't given because of titles. It's sustained because we listen to those who were once told to wait in silence." What had begun as one woman in a chair had now become a chorus, and none of them were sitting anymore. When Serena Blackwell halted the Central Mall expansion, most assumed it was a momentary disruption, an executive leveraging her power, a hiccup in protocol. But by week's end, it was clear the foundation itself was shifting. Aurora Galleria's leadership issued a formal press statement. In alignment with our majority stakeholders' standards, we are undergoing a complete procedural review. All guest-facing operations will be restructured with equity as the guiding principle. No department is exempt. For the first time in the company's 40-year history, vendor contracts were paused mid-cycle. That single line in the internal memo hit like a hammer. All vendor renewals suspended pending inclusion audit. Suppliers scrambled. PR firms called emergency meetings. Several retail brand managers requested clarity on what inclusion audit entailed. What they found surprised them. The audit wasn't symbolic. It was forensic. Emails were pulled, surveillance logs reviewed, hiring patterns dissected. Even the floor plans of guest lounges were analyzed, who had access, who didn't, and why. In partnership with Blackwell Urban Partners, Aurora launched a multi-phase reset. 1. Staff re-onboarding. Everyone from interns to executives would undergo a new orientation with real case studies, including Serena's. 2. Vendor vetting. Companies known for discriminatory practices or lacking representation in leadership would be flagged. 3. Equity scorecard. Every department would be scored quarterly on accessibility, responsiveness, and bias mitigation. Not everyone was pleased. One long-standing contractor for VIP events wrote, "We've worked with Aurora for 12 years. Now we're being told we need to submit a diversity statement just to pour champagne." The response from Aurora: yes. Meanwhile, Serena reviewed every clause herself, not to micromanage, but to make sure this wasn't a PR pivot. It had to be real, measurable, sustainable. And the industry took note. At 2:17 p.m. on Thursday, the global fashion label Maynard Ficumplers released a statement. "We stand in support of equitable leadership and meaningful reform. Until such leadership is fully recognized and empowered at Aurora Galleria, we will postpone all activation events, including our luxury capsule launch." Within hours, the news trended. Maynard freezes. Aurora partnership over. CEO disrespect. Scandal. Other brands followed quietly. Some reduced marketing presence. Others delayed store openings. For Aurora, the message was clear. Serena hadn't paused a project. She had paused the illusion. Back in her office, Serena sat with Emma Nguyen, now shadowing her as junior strategy liaison. "Do you think they'll pull out?" Emma asked. Serena replied, "Some might, and that's fine." She turned to her monitor, displaying equity charts from the audit team. "I'm not interested in who stays for profits. I want to know who stays for values." Later that evening, Aurora's executive team held a live webinar for shareholders. It was meant to calm nerves. But one question in the live Q&A window stood out. Why did it take public humiliation to discover internal discrimination? The moderator skipped it, but the question hung in the air. Because shareholders now understood this wasn't just Serena's responsibility. It was theirs. Vendors began updating their onboarding packets. Consulting groups started quoting the Serena Clause, a reference to the control mechanism Serena had embedded in the original deal. Ensure your contracts allow for ethical pause. If not, you don't control your equity, you lease it. A week after the freeze, Serena walked the concourse with a redesign team. The mood was different. People greeted her directly. Security nodded respectfully. Hosts waited for her to speak, not assuming her purpose. She stopped beside the gold elevator where she'd once been told to wait. The velvet rope was gone. In its place, a wide opening. No barrier, just a sign. Executive Access welcomes all identified leaders. Serena smiled faintly. "Now we're starting to talk," she said. And with that, they moved forward towards something cleaner, harder, and far more honest than what had glittered before. 10 days after the incident, Aurora Galleria was quieter, not because business had slowed, but because people were finally listening. In the executive suite, the energy had shifted. Gone were the performative meetings and keyword-heavy emails. In their place, working sessions led by Serena Blackwell and a rotating group of emerging voices, junior staff interns, overlooked assistants. It was no longer a room of rank. It was a room of relevance. Serena sat at the head, not as a ruler, but as an architect, one who had cleared out the rot and started rebuilding from the foundation. Across from her sat Emma Nguyen, now officially promoted to Junior Strategy Liaison for Institutional Equity, a title Serena had created herself. It's not about the words Serena had said handing Emma her new badge. It's about the access it represents. Emma hadn't told her parents yet. She was still trying to believe it herself. One of the first initiatives Serena implemented was a leadership reclamation cohort, a mentoring circle for staff who had once been overlooked, excluded, or underestimated. "This isn't about diversity panels," Serena explained. "It's about repairing trust. If the only people being developed look like the people already in charge, we haven't changed anything." The first group included a veteran janitor with 22 years of service and no promotion, a deaf front desk receptionist whose suggestions were often ignored, a Latinx assistant buyer who spoke 5 languages but was stuck in support roles, and Emma Nguyen because she'd had the courage to hesitate, and that mattered. Each session focused not on fixing individuals, but on fixing the space around them. One exercise asked, "When were you last seen for who you are not, what you do?" The room was silent for a full minute. Then the stories came soft, steady, undeniable. And Serena listened to every word like it was strategy. Because to her, it was. It wasn't live-streamed. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a town hall-style gathering held in the atrium under the chandeliers. All departments were present. Uniforms, name badges, even vendors. Serena stood alone at the front. No podium, just her and a handheld mic. "Some of you saw what happened to me," she began. "Some of you helped it happen. And some of you said nothing because you thought you couldn't." She paused. "I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to invite you." Silence. "Invite you to rebuild something worthy of every guest, every worker, every person who steps through these glass doors with the hope that they matter." She let the words hang. "I don't want you to fear getting it wrong. I want you to fear staying comfortable in what's already wrong." There was no applause, not yet. Just absorption. Even Lucas, standing at the back in street clothes no longer employed, stared at her without blinking. Serena nodded, stepped back, and let the silence do what it needed to do. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the whole atrium stood. Later that day, Emma and Serena sat reviewing feedback from the new digital equity portal. One anonymous entry read, "I used to be proud of my paycheck. Now, I'm proud of where I work." Emma looked up. "That one hit me." Serena smiled. "That one means we're doing it right." Outside the atrium, a reporter from a business magazine waited for a quote. "We're writing about leadership evolution," he said. "Can you sum up your approach?" Serena thought for a moment, then answered, "Leadership isn't a position. It's permission. And too many people have been waiting for it in silence. My job now is to make sure they don't have to ask anymore." That quote would make the cover of the next issue. But inside Aurora Galleria, it wasn't print that mattered. It was practice. And Serena Blackwell was making sure it happened one reclaimed voice at a time. By the third week after the incident, it became obvious Aurora Galleria would never go back to how it was. The marble still gleamed. The glass walls still reflected success. But behind those surfaces, something fundamental had fractured and then reformed. And not everyone welcomed it. Inside the senior strategy boardroom, Serena reviewed a set of documents detailing legacy incentive policies. Across from her sat Raymond Wolf, former vice president of operations, a man known for his polished speeches and old-school charm. "I understand the push for inclusion," he said, offering a tight smile. "But some of these changes rotating departmental leads anonymous review boards, they'll undermine structure. Our people need familiarity." Serena met his eyes calmly. "No, Raymond, they need fairness." He shifted in his seat. "Look, I supported your authority. I agreed to the audit. But you can't expect the company to run on emotion. This is business." Serena closed the folder. "This isn't emotion," she said. "This is equity." And you've confused tradition with entitlement. Elsewhere in the building, a quiet shift was happening. Emma Nguyen held her first internal workshop, rewriting the welcome script. Attendance was optional. The room was full. Junior hosts, concierge staff, even product reps from partner stores showed up, notebooks in hand. Emma began the session, not with a PowerPoint, but with a question. Who's the most invisible person you've greeted today? The silence that followed said more than any slide deck could. Upstairs, Serena submitted an official policy change request to the board. Effective immediately, all executive access privileges tied to personal relationships, seniority alone, or discretionary VIP classification shall be dissolved. All future access decisions must follow transparent protocol, documented entry logs, and equity-first screening. The legal team called it unprecedented. Serena called it necessary. Later that day, during a board follow-up session, Raymond stood to challenge Serena's directive. "This policy will alienate our legacy sponsors," he said, addressing the room. "We're punishing familiarity instead of rewarding loyalty." Several board members looked uneasy. A few nodded slightly. Then Serena stood. "Let me be clear," she said. "Loyalty to exclusion is not loyalty at all." She turned to Chairman Prescott. "If Aurora Galleria is truly ready to lead the next era of luxury, we don't just change the door, we change who holds the key." Prescott nodded slowly. "I agree." He turned to legal. "Remove Raymond Wolf from the operations review panel. Effective immediately." Raymond froze. "You're serious?" Prescott didn't blink. "We are." Word spread quickly. In the staff lounge, someone whispered, "Wolf's out." Another replied, finally. At 4:06 p.m., the internal portal updated. Leadership realignment. Notice Raymond Wolf removed. Interim assigned by Strategic Equity Board. Employees read it with quiet satisfaction. Not because he was hated, but because his era was over. Serena didn't gloat. She simply walked to the glass windows overlooking the concourse, watching people flow in and out, no longer herded behind ropes or scanned with glances. The change had cost power, but it had purchased purpose. That evening, she wrote a short entry in her private journal, "Systems don't fall overnight." But the moment the wrong hands let go, the right ones begin to rebuild. By week 4, the narrative had settled. Dr. Serena Blackwell had become not just the architect of Aurora Galleria's recovery, but its symbol, a case study, a living lesson. The policies were changing. The culture was reshaping. The walls that once whispered exclusion now echoed with accountability. And so when Serena called for a private roundtable with Chairman Prescott Emma Nguyen and the heads of key departments, everyone assumed it was another milestone announcement, an expansion restart perhaps, or a new appointment. Instead, Serena stood at the end of the table holding no folder, no notes. "I want to talk about legacy," she said. Emma's brows furrowed. Prescott leaned forward. "Go on." Serena took a deep breath. "When I froze this project, she said I did it. Not because I was offended, but because the foundation we built was cracked. I had to act. And I did." She looked around the room at the faces now more diverse, more attentive than ever. But here's the part. "No one expects I never intended to stay." A stunned silence fell. "I built this place to outgrow me," Serena continued, "to teach systems how to breathe on their own. And now I believe Aurora can do that." Emma whispered, "You're stepping down." Serena nodded. "From direct oversight, yes. I'll remain on the board. I'll fund the mission. But I won't sit at the head of the table." Prescott blinked. "Why now?" "Because true change," she said, "doesn't happen when people like me stay forever. It happens when people like Emma rise, and when rooms get used to listening to new voices." From her bag, Serena withdrew a single folder. She handed it to Emma. Inside, a full succession plan. A proposed equity training track. An internal nomination form with Emma's name already approved as interim strategic operations lead. Emma stared at it. I'm not ready." Serena smiled. "Neither was I, but I acted anyway." Tears welled at the corners of Emma's eyes, but she held them back. The room was still silent. Then Prescott stood and extended his hand across the table. "Dr. Blackwell," he said, "your transition will be remembered as the standard." She took his hand. "It's not about the exit. It's about who walks in after." Within hours, the news leaked, but it didn't spark outrage. It sparked reflection. Serena Blackwell steps down, but leaves behind a blueprint. From power to permission. Why true leadership means letting go. Aurora's press office issued a short, respectful statement, but the real headline came from staff. One intern posted on LinkedIn, "She could have ruled forever." Instead, she opened the door wider. That evening, Serena stood alone in the concourse one last time. She looked at the mirrored column where she once waited unacknowledged. This time, as guests passed her, they smiled and said her name. Dr. Blackwell. Serena. Thank you. She didn't correct them. She didn't pause. She simply nodded, walked to the door, and stepped into the dusk. Emma watched from above and understood this wasn't a goodbye. It was a handoff. The next Monday morning, Emma Nguyen stepped through the executive entrance, not as an intern, not as an observer, but as Aurora Galleria's new strategic operations lead. Her badge had changed. So had the way people looked at her. Some offered warm nods. Some offered guarded smiles. A few, still adjusting, offered nothing at all. She didn't let any of it throw her off. Emma had walked this corridor many times before, clutching a tablet, fetching coffee, jotting notes behind the scenes. Now she walked it with her own agenda and her own keycard. The first meeting she chaired was in Serena's old conference room. The walls still bore the scent of eucalyptus and quiet authority. She opened with a sentence she'd written in the quiet of her apartment the night before. "This room was once closed to people like me. Now it's open for everyone, but we have to earn that openness every day." There were no objections, no applause either, just thoughtful silence. And that was enough. Later that week, Aurora hosted a VIP preview for a new Japanese luxury retailer. The event was to be Emma's first real stress test. A multicultural welcome for an international audience. Everything had been rehearsed. Greeting staff briefed. Name cards printed. Translation headsets ordered. Emma stood near the check-in kiosk, scanning the floor, checking for smiles. Posture, eye contact. Every moment felt like a memory being made. Until it happened. A soft commotion near the central entrance caught her eye. One of the newer hosts, clearly nervous, was stopping an elderly Japanese guest from entering the main viewing area. "I'm sorry, I need to confirm your credentials," the host stammered. The guest, Mr. Nishimura, the founder's father, didn't speak English fluently. His eyes flickered with confusion. Emma moved instantly. She approached, gently placed a hand on the host's shoulder, and greeted the guest in fluent Japanese. "Konnichiwa, Nishimura-sama. Omatase shimashita. Kono homu e yokoso." "Hello, Mr. Nishimura. Thank you for waiting. Welcome to this space." The guest relaxed. Emma turned to the host. "Walk with me," she said quietly. They stepped aside. "You did what you thought was right," she said. "But intention isn't enough when perception creates harm. What matters now is how we respond." The host, barely out of college, nodded, clearly shaken. Emma didn't scold him. She handed him a translated cue card and said, "Start here. You're not expected to know everything. But from now on, you're expected to grow." Word of Emma's intervention spread across the floor within an hour. Not because she had saved face, but because she had protected dignity both the guests and the staff members. In the debrief that afternoon, Emma didn't skip the incident. She led with it. "Today, we stumbled, but we stumbled forward." Let's turn this into curriculum. Real training with live scenarios. Nobody argued. They just wrote it down. Upstairs, Serena received a short update on her phone from Emma. "Handled our first real moment. We'll build protocol into week 2 onboarding. Thank you for teaching me how to stay steady." Serena replied, "You taught yourself how to stand. I only reminded you that you could." At day's end, Emma walked through the atrium, now glowing with late afternoon sun. Guests chatted freely. Staff smiled, not performatively, but with presence. She paused by the same chair Serena once occupied in silence. Someone had placed a small brass plate on the side table beside it, in honor of those who waited. Now we welcome with eyes wide open. Emma touched it gently, then turned towards the future hers to carry now, and hers to shape. Aurora Galleria had changed, not just in its policies or its personnel, but in its pulse. Every guest who walked through its polished glass doors now moved through a space intentionally designed to see them, hear them, and respect them. But what surprised even Serena Blackwell wasn't just how Aurora had evolved. It was how far the ripple had reached. In downtown Chicago, a retail center that once prided itself on exclusivity announced a new policy. No guest will be seated, served, or screened based on look-based protocol. Access is now behavior-based, not appearance-based. In Dallas, a luxury hotel installed reception equity kiosks modeled after Emma's redesign, which allowed every guest to self-identify their needs without fear of profiling. And in a quiet suburb of Seattle, a small but growing co-working space renamed their welcome suite the Blackwell Entry Hall. where all work begins with dignity. Serena hadn't asked for any of it, but her name kept showing up not as decoration, but as direction. Meanwhile, Emma Nguyen was invited to speak on a national panel about redesigning institutional welcome. The event was streamed live to over 80,000 viewers. She wore no makeup. She carried no prepared speech, just a bracelet from her mother and a printed copy of Serena's first post-incident memo. When asked what made Aurora's shift real, she replied, "We didn't wait for perfection. We moved with intention, and we stayed long enough to listen to those who never got the mic." That quote would headline 3 business journals the next day. Back at Aurora, Emma initiated a mentorship exchange, linking senior executives to junior staff from different backgrounds for monthly one-on-one reverse briefings. The first pairing, a 58-year-old regional VP and a 23-year-old wheelchair-using design intern named Caleb. They met. They laughed. They rewrote the accessibility map of the entire West Wing together. Then came the email. From the CEO of Northridge Holdings, one of the largest commercial real estate firms in North America. After reviewing the Aurora Galleria case study, we will be adopting a new code across all properties. We're calling it the Serena Standard. Access by policy, not privilege. Welcoming by behavior, not appearance. Leadership by listening first, then speaking last. Please extend our thanks to Dr. Blackwell for reminding us what structures are for sheltering, not sorting. The announcement was broadcast live. Reporters called it the most influential diversity infrastructure shift of the decade. Serena saw the headline, but didn't forward it. She simply archived the message and whispered to herself, "It's not mine anymore. It belongs to the people." At Aurora, Emma had just finished leading a training for a group of new hires, many of whom had no idea what happened weeks before. And that was a good thing, because now the new standard wasn't revolutionary. It was just normal. In the atrium, a mural was being painted on a side wall. Dozens of staff members contributed brush strokes. Hosts painted doors. Maintenance workers added light. Interns painted outlines of rising stairs. At the top of the steps, a silhouette not detailed, not named, just a figure standing hands at their sides. Posture calm with others behind them rising too. Below it read, "No one leads alone. No one is left behind." On the mural's final day, Serena came to visit. She stood beside Emma. They didn't say much, just watched. Then Serena turned to her and said, "One day, they won't know who started it. And that's exactly how you'll know it worked." Years later, long after the headlines had faded and the policies had been updated so many times they felt permanent, people still told the story, not with outrage, not with scandal, but with respect. They spoke of the woman who sat still while the world mistook her for invisible, and who, without shouting, reshaped the world around her. They spoke of the intern who hesitated but stayed, and then rose. They spoke of a chair, a rope, a cup of water, and a silence that thundered through every layer of leadership in one of the country's most luxurious spaces. In classrooms, business schools referenced it as the Aurora Pivot. In HR workshops, managers asked, "What would Serena do here?" And in everyday spaces, young women of color looked at boardroom doors differently, not with doubt, but with design. Because now they had a blueprint. The legacy Serena left behind wasn't a speech, or a lawsuit, or a victory lap. It was a decision that power was not something to perform, but something to protect. That dignity was not something to demand, but something to define by action. That leadership meant sitting in discomfort until the room learns how to move. In one of her last journal entries found later by a mentee, Serena wrote, "You don't need to raise your voice to raise the bar. You just need to know who you are, and sit there long enough for the room to catch up." Aurora Galleria stands today, not just as a shopping center, but as a model. There's no longer a VIP rope. There's no longer a question of who gets seen first. And when guests enter, they're greeted with 6 words engraved on the reception wall. Welcome. We've been expecting all of you. Emma Nguyen now leads Aurora's Global Expansion Division. She no longer calls Serena every week, but every month she reads a single line from the email Serena sent the day she stepped back. Be the kind of leader who teaches people how to treat each other, even when you're not in the room. And if you walk through the East Wing today, you'll find a quiet glass case. Nothing flashy. Inside, the original folded invitation. A gold name badge that says, Guest. A printout of the internal freeze notice. And a handwritten card that reads, This seat was never empty. We just didn't know how to look at it. This wasn't just a story about business. It was a story about worth. A story about what happens when the world says, wait, and someone finally says, I already belong. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.